The key turned in the lock with its familiar resistance, that slight catch at the halfway point that Marcus had been meaning to fix for 3 months now. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, arms full of grocery bags that cut red lines into his palms, and stopped dead in the doorway. The smell hit him first, garlic and tomatoes and something herbal, basil maybe, or oregano, the kind of smell that made his stomach clench with sudden, unexpected hunger. For a moment he thought he'd walked into the wrong apartment, but no, there was his ratty brown couch with the coffee stain on the left cushion. There was the stack of unread mail on the side table. There was the framed photo of his parents on their wedding day that he kept meaning to hang but never did. Marcus set the grocery bags down slowly, listening. The apartment wasn't silent. From the kitchen came the soft bubble of something simmering, and beneath that, so quiet he almost missed it, the sound of someone humming. He knew that hum. Knew it the way you know the sound of rain on a roof, or your own breathing in the dark. Elena, the humming stopped. There was a pause, just long enough for his heart to kick up its rhythm, and then she appeared in the kitchen doorway, wooden spoon in hand, wearing one of his old college t-shirts over jeans. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and there was a splash of red sauce on her cheek. "Hey," she said, as casual as if she'd never left. As casual as if the last 8 months hadn't happened. Marcus stared at her, his mind doing that thing it did when confronted with something impossible, trying to sort reality from wishful thinking. But she was real. She was standing right there, wiping her hands on a dish towel that he didn't recognize, looking at him with those brown eyes that had always seen too much. "I hope you don't mind," Elena said, gesturing vaguely behind her toward the kitchen. "I used my key. I probably should have called first, but I don't know what I thought. I just wanted to do something normal. The word hung in the air between them like smoke. There was nothing normal about this. Nothing normal about coming home to find your ex-girlfriend cooking dinner in your kitchen 8 months after she'd told you she couldn't do this anymore, couldn't be what you needed, couldn't stay. "How did you?" Marcus started, then shook his head. "You still have your key." "I kept meaning to give it back," she said, and had the grace to look embarrassed. "That's not true. I didn't want to give it back. I kept it in my wallet, in the little zipper pocket. Sometimes I'd take it out and just hold it." Marcus closed the door behind him, the grocery bags forgotten on the floor. He should be angry, he thought distantly. Should be outraged that she'd let herself in like this, invaded his space, upended whatever equilibrium he'd managed to find in her absence. But all he felt was tired and hungry and something else. Something that felt dangerously like hope. "What are you making?" he asked, because it seemed safer than asking what he really wanted to know. "Pasta," Elena said, a small smile touching her lips. "Your grandmother's recipe, the one you tried to teach me that time, and I burned the garlic so badly we had to order pizza. I've been practicing." She had been practicing. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, some careful wall he'd built. She'd been practicing his grandmother's recipe, the one he'd told her about on their 3rd date, the one that smelled like every Sunday of his childhood. The one that meant home. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know." Elena turned back toward the kitchen, and he followed her, drawn by something stronger than common sense. "But I wanted to. I've wanted to for months, actually. I just didn't know if you'd slam the door in my face if I showed up." "I wouldn't have," Marcus said, and realized it was true. He'd imagined her return 1,000 times in the past 8 months, played out every scenario from tearful reunion to cold dismissal. But in every version he let her in. He always let her in. The kitchen was warmer than the rest of the apartment, heat rising from the stove where a pot of sauce bubbled gently. Another pot held pasta, and she'd set 2 plates on the small counter that served as his dining table, 2 forks, 2 glasses already filled with water. No wine, he noticed. She remembered that he'd quit drinking after his father's diagnosis, one of the many small ways life had shifted in the year they were together. "It's almost ready," Elena said, moving around the kitchen with an ease that made his throat tight. She'd always belonged here, slotted into his life like a puzzle piece he hadn't known was missing until she arrived. 5 more minutes for the pasta. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. She'd lost weight, he noticed. Not much, but enough that her jeans hung differently on her hips. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and her hands moved with a nervous energy that was new. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "Why today?" Elena didn't turn around, but he saw her shoulders tense. "Because it's been exactly 8 months," she said. 8 months since I walked out. 8 months since I made the biggest mistake of my life and was too proud and too scared to admit it. The timer on the stove beeped, and she turned it off with more force than necessary. She drained the pasta in the colander, steam rising around her face, and for a moment she was obscured, ghost-like. Then the steam cleared, and she was there again, solid and real, scooping pasta onto plates with shaking hands. "I've started therapy," she said, ladling sauce over the pasta. "Real therapy, not just the crisis counseling after my mom died. I've been going twice a week since March. 4 months ago." Marcus did the math automatically, a habit from his work. 4 months of therapy, but only now showing up at his door. Elena carried the plates to the counter, set them down carefully. "My therapist asked me what I was afraid of," she said, still not looking at him. "And I gave her all the usual answers: commitment, disappointment, being left like my dad left, all the greatest hits of my childhood trauma, and she listened, and then she asked me what I was more afraid of, risking those things, or living the rest of my life without you." She finally looked up, and Marcus saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I didn't have an answer," she whispered. "For the first time in months I didn't have an answer. And that's when I knew I had to come here." Marcus moved without thinking, crossing the small space between them. He stopped just short of touching her, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. "You broke my heart," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "You told me you loved me, and then you left, and you broke my heart. I know." A tear spilled over, tracked down her cheek. "I know I did. And I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm so good I'm sorry. I kept expecting you to come back," he continued, the words spilling out now that he'd started. "For weeks I kept thinking you'd realize you'd made a mistake, that you'd call or text or just show up like you did tonight. And then weeks turned into months, and I realized you weren't coming back, so I tried to move on." Elena flinched, and he saw fear flash across her face. "Did you?" she asked. "Move on." He should say yes, should tell her that he'd dated, found someone else, rebuilt his life without her. It would be kinder, maybe, or at least cleaner. But Marcus had never been good at lying to her. "No," he said. "I went on a few dates, let my sister set me up with her coworker, tried one of those apps, but no, I couldn't move on. I couldn't either," Elena said softly. "I tried. God, I tried so hard. I dated this guy for 3 weeks, and he was nice and stable, and all the things I told myself I needed. And the whole time I was with him, all I could think about was you, how you'd laugh at his jokes in that way you do, that genuine belly laugh. How you'd know exactly what to order for me at restaurants. How you'd touch the small of my back when we walked down the street." She reached up, wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I broke up with him after he told me he was falling for me. It wasn't fair to him, being in love with someone who was so obviously in love with someone else. The pasta was getting cold on the plates beside them, but neither of them moved to eat it. They stood there in the small kitchen, the air thick with everything unsaid, everything broken and maybe, possibly, being pieced back together. "I don't know if I can do this again," Marcus said, and he was surprised by how calm his voice sounded. "I don't know if I can survive you leaving a second time. Then I won't leave." Elena took a step closer, close enough now that he could smell her shampoo, that same coconut scent she'd always used. "I can't promise I won't screw up or get scared or have moments where the fear gets so big I can't breathe, but I won't leave, not again. I'll stay, and we'll work through it together." "How can I believe that?" he asked, not cruelly, just honestly. "How can I trust that?" "You probably can't," she admitted. "Not right away. I have to earn that trust back. I know that. But Marcus, I'm asking for the chance to try. I'm asking you to let me prove that I've changed, that I'm doing the work, that I want us, more than I'm afraid of it." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw all the things he'd fallen in love with, and all the ways she'd hurt him, and all the possibility of what they could be if they were brave enough to try it again. It would be easier to say no, safer. He could eat his microwave dinner alone and watch whatever he wanted on TV, and not worry about his heart being shattered again. But when had he ever chosen easy over Elena? "The pasta's getting cold," he said finally. She blinked, clearly thrown by the change in subject. "What, the pasta? You made my grandmother's recipe. We should eat it while it's hot." A slow smile spread across Elena's face, tentative but real. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, we should." They sat at the small counter, knees almost touching, and ate in silence for a few minutes. The pasta was good, better than good. She'd nailed the balance of garlic and basil, the slight sweetness of the tomatoes, the way the sauce clung to the noodles without being too heavy. "This is perfect," Marcus said and meant it. "I called your grandmother," Elena admitted, twirling pasta on her fork. "Last month I asked her for the recipe, and we ended up talking for 2 hours. She made me promise to make it for you." Marcus set down his fork. "You called my nun, nah." "I did, and she yelled at me, which I completely deserved, in Italian and English, so I got the message very clearly in both languages. And then she told me that love is a verb, not a feeling, that it's something you do every day, in small ways and big ways. And she said that if I loved you, I needed to stop being a coward and do something about it." He laughed, surprised by the sound in his own throat. "That sounds like non. Nah, she's terrifying and I love her," Elena said. "She also said that you've been miserable without me, and that she was tired of you lying to her about being fine." "I wasn't lying," Marcus protested weakly. "You absolutely were." Elena reached across the small space between them and took his hand. Her fingers were warm from the pasta, and they fit against his like they'd never been apart. "I was miserable too, absolutely, completely miserable. I quit my job. You quit your job. 2 months ago, the one I chose over us, over you, turns out it wasn't worth it. All those hours, all that stress, all that supposed prestige. I was working 80 hours a week for a company that didn't care if I lived or died, and I was doing it because I thought that's what success looked like. Thought that's what would prove I was worthy." She squeezed his hand. "My therapist asked me what I was trying to prove and to whom, and I realized I was trying to prove to my dead parents that I was okay, that their divorce didn't break me, that my mom's death didn't destroy me, but they're gone, Marcus. And I was so busy trying to prove something to ghosts that I almost lost the one real thing in my life." "What are you doing now?" he asked. "For work, I'm teaching," she said, and her face lit up in a way he remembered from before, from the early days when everything was still new and possible. "High school English," It pays about a third of what I was making, and I have to buy my own supplies, and I come home exhausted every day, and I love it. I actually love it." They finished eating as Elena told him about her students, about the kid who'd never turned in an assignment until she assigned poetry, and he wrote something so raw and honest it made her cry in the teacher's lounge, about the girl who was reading at a fifth grade level but was determined to graduate, staying after school twice a week for extra help, about how different it felt to do work that mattered, even in small ways. Marcus cleared the plates when they were done, washed them in the sink while Elena dried. It was such a domestic thing, such a couple thing, and it felt both familiar and strange, like trying on an old jacket that didn't quite fit the same way anymore. "I'm not saying yes," Marcus said as he watched the soap suds circle the drain. "Not yet." He felt rather than saw Elena tense beside him. "Okay, but I'm not saying no either." He turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "I need time. I need to see that you mean this, that it's not just the guilt talking or some momentary impulse. I need to know that you're really doing the work, really changing. That's fair." Elena said, though he could hear the disappointment in her voice, "That's more than fair, but—" He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You can keep your key, and maybe we can do this again. Dinner, not a date, not yet, just dinner." Hope bloomed across her face, beautiful and fragile. When Friday, he suggested, "I'll cook this time. I'll bring dessert," she said immediately, "Those cookies from the bakery on 5th Street that you love. The ones with the chocolate and sea salt. Those ones exactly." They stood there in his small kitchen, the dinner dishes clean and drying on the rack, the apartment smelling like tomatoes and possibility. Marcus knew this was risky, knew that letting her back in, even just for dinners, even just as friends rebuilding something, could end in heartbreak again. But he also knew that some things were worth the risk. "I should go," Elena said, though she made no move toward the door. "Let you have your evening. You could stay," Marcus offered, then quickly added, "on the couch, like old times when we'd watch bad movies and throw popcorn at the screen." She smiled, and it was the first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her all evening. "I'd like that." So they settled onto his ratty brown couch with the coffee stain, Elena curled up on one end and Marcus on the other, a careful foot of space between them. He queued up some action movie neither of them had seen, and within 10 minutes they were both mocking the dialogue, falling back into the easy rhythm they'd always had. Halfway through the movie, Elena fell asleep, her head tilted at an angle that would give her a terrible crick in her neck. Marcus paused the film and watched her for a moment, studying the face he'd memorized 1,000 times. In sleep, the worry lines around her eyes smoothed out, and she looked younger, more peaceful. He got up carefully, retrieved a blanket from the linen closet, and draped it over her. She stirred but didn't wake, just burrowed deeper into the couch cushions. Marcus sat down on the other end again, far enough away to be respectful, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence. He didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if they could really fix what had broken between them, if trust could be rebuilt, if love could survive being shattered and glued back together. But as he sat there in his small apartment with its burned-out light bulb in the hallway and its sticky kitchen drawer and its stack of unread mail, Marcus thought that maybe, possibly, they could try. The movie played on, unwatched now, flickering light across the dark room. Outside, the city hummed with its usual evening chaos, sirens and car horns, and the rumble of the subway beneath the streets. Inside, there was just the quiet sound of Elena breathing in her sleep and the knowledge that she'd come back. She'd come home, let herself in, set 2 plates, made his grandmother's recipe, and called him Marcus in that way she had, with all the weight of history and hurt and hope. She'd come back, and this time, maybe this time, they'd both be brave enough to let each other stay. Marcus picked up his phone, scrolled to his grandmother's contact, and sent a quick text. "She made your recipe. It was perfect. Thank you." The response came almost immediately, despite the late hour. "Good. Don't be stupid this time. Love is work. Do the work." He smiled at the screen, then set the phone aside. On the couch, Elena shifted in her sleep, and her hand fell open, palm up, an unconscious invitation or offering. Marcus looked at it for a long moment, then reached out and gently, carefully, placed his hand in hers. Her fingers curled around his automatically, even in sleep, holding on. And maybe that was enough for now. Maybe that was where they started again, with held hands and second chances and the kind of hope that was equal parts terrifying and necessary. The movie ended eventually, credits rolling up the screen, but Marcus didn't move. He sat there on his ratty couch in his small apartment, holding hands with the woman who'd broken his heart, and thought about Friday. Thought about what he'd cook for her, whether she'd laugh at his jokes the way she used to, whether they could rebuild what they'd lost, or if they'd have to build something entirely new. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in the apartments and houses and lives contained within it. But inside, in Marcus's kitchen, there were 2 clean plates drying on the rack. In his living room, there was a woman sleeping on his couch, a blanket tucked around her, their hands intertwined. And in his chest, there was something fragile and fierce, something that felt dangerously like a second chance. The key she'd kept in her wallet, in that little zipper pocket, would open this door again on Friday. And maybe the Friday after that. And maybe, eventually, it wouldn't just be dinners and movies with a careful foot of space between them. Maybe, if they did the work, if they were brave enough, it would be something more. But that was for later. For now, there was just this, the 2 of them, together again, in the quiet darkness of an ordinary Tuesday evening. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was just dinner and dishes, and an old movie and hands held in sleep. It was just the beginning of something that might, possibly, have a chance. And sometimes, Marcus thought, as his eyes grew heavy, and he let himself lean back into the couch cushions, sometimes the beginning was the hardest part. But they'd made it this far. She'd come home, she'd let herself in and set 2 plates, cooked his grandmother's recipe, stayed even when staying was scary. Tomorrow he'd wake up before her, make coffee the way she liked it, and they'd have to talk about boundaries and expectations and what this tentative reconnection meant. Tomorrow there would be questions and complications and the messy work of rebuilding trust. But tonight there was just this, warm pasta and clean dishes and the weight of her hand in his. Tonight there was the simple fact that she'd come back and he'd let her stay, and for now, for this one quiet evening, that was enough.